welcome to the final webinar in our 2026 Women in Leadership Executive Speaker Series, with this one titled Leadership in Times of Grief and Crisis, Insights from President Astrid S. Tuminez. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project and an extension professor of leadership at Utah State University. And I'm the host and will be leading the discussion today. And before I read more of my text, I will say I was at Utah Valley University for 18 years. And so it's nice to be able to talk about UVU and the full state, and some of the experiences as well. So this event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents, and we have been for 17 years now, by first producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research, second, creating and gathering valuable resources, and third, convening trainings and events that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And thanks to our sponsors, of course, the Utah Women in Leadership Project and USU Extension. So I'm just going to jump right in and introduce President Tuminez. So she was appointed the seventh president of Utah Valley University in 2018. Born in a farming village in the Philippines, she moved with her parents and siblings to the slums of a larger city when she was 2 years old, her parents seeking better educational opportunities for their children. Her pursuit of education eventually took her to the United States, where she graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in international relations and Russian literature from Brigham Young University. She later earned a master's degree from Harvard University in Soviet Studies and a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Political Science. So before UVU, she was an executive at Microsoft, where she led corporate, external, and legal affairs in Southeast Asia. And she also served as Vice Dean of Research in the School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. She's worked in philanthropy and venture capital in New York City and is a permanent member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And she serves on boards of Carnegie Corporation of New York and Cambia Health Solutions, and on the advisory board of Zions Bank. And she's the author of, here's the title of the book, Russian Nationalism Since 1856, Ideology and the Making of Foreign Policy, and other publications as well. And she has 3 children. In her spare time, she enjoys running, dancing, and traveling. Welcome. It's so good to have you here, President.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
And I just wanted to open up with a really broad question to have you talk to us before I dive into a lot of my specific questions. Drawing from your life and leadership journey, what reflections would you like to share, really, to just begin our conversation today?
I know that is a very broad question. So, starting with life and leadership, life can be a very strange thing, and leadership is a gendered journey. And so, what we bring to leadership, whatever positions we're in, is really our own backgrounds, our own values. And I kind of knew as a kid that I had a strong personality as soon as I went to school and the nuns picked me up from the slums. It was a discovery for me to know that I had opinions and that I could be smart. It was a discovery. I was illiterate when I started school. And I didn't really say to myself, I'm going to set out to be a leader. I never said that. In fact, I think people are dangerous who are looking for power and looking for fame and leadership positions. The best leaders probably are humble, accidental leaders. When you think about folks like Nelson Mandela, who spent 26 years in jail in apartheid South Africa and then comes out, he's a leader. So life and leadership, I think the way that those things weave together And I would almost call it just life, whatever we do, whatever our positions are in work, and we lead at home as well. To me, they're one thing, and they're really informed by our values. And we change as well. I think over time, both life and leadership change because we change. And if you're not changing, then you got to ask yourself, why aren't you changing? We should be changing as
We
long as we are
should.
alive. Yes. So maybe that's sufficient for my opening
I love that.
remarks, because I know
Thank you.
you have a lot of questions
I
and
do. I'm so curious. But in the bio, I mentioned this, but you also mentioned this. You've spoken openly about your early life in the Philippines. Give us some examples in terms of, how have those formative experiences shaped the way you understand resilience, understand leadership, and even purpose?
Mhm. We are products of how we were raised.
Mhm.
We are products of our village, our city, our community, our country. We are products of our culture. We are products of religion or no religion if you don't
Yeah.
have one. So there's a big chunk of us that I think is almost predetermined. So when I think about my own formative years, if you think of formative years, 0 to 10, so I started the first 2 years of life in a rice farming village. And then from 2 to 10, I was in the slums. And it was truly a precarious existence. I understand indignity when people say they are poor and have no dignity. I fully understand
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
When people are afraid, I understand it because I've been there. When people feel powerless, I understand it because I've been there. When people feel plain and ugly, I understand it because I've been there. When people feel like everyone else is putting them down, I get that too. So when I look back, it's become very obvious to me that some of the key things maybe in my formative years, one, of course, poverty was huge because
Yeah.
it led me to an early appreciation of how when you lack money, you have to be clever.
Mm.
Let me say that again. When you lack money, you have to be clever because you cannot throw money at your problems. You can't just go buy a new pair of shoes. How do you deal with your problems or you don't have food? So I think from the poverty made me creative.
Mm.
This is why I respect poor people. We put them down, but if you were poor, you wouldn't survive. If you got tuberculosis, you didn't survive. My grandmother had tuberculosis till she died at age 94. So
Wow.
how do you become creative? How do you make toys when you're a kid, when you don't have a cent to buy a toy? I never had Christmas. I never had presents. I never had
Wow.
a tree. Never had birthday cake. So I think all of that it makes you discover some other ways of thinking. So poverty and adversity can be a good thing. And then
How
second,
many siblings did you
I
have?
I had
Or
I
do
had I had 6 siblings
Okay.
growing up, and we all lived in a hut, on stilts, a bamboo hut on stilts in the sea, without plumbing, without electricity, without television, without
Wow.
radio. Um, so that's one. The second thing that I discovered from my formative years, of course, is the critical role education can play
Yes.
because when the nuns took me into their convent school, which was a school for rich kids. So first the discovery of reading and numbers and what a wonderful world books are, and that I was capable. So it was a discovery that I was capable, and it also exposed me to wealth. My classmates had
Oh.
drivers, houses, they had swimming pools, and it exposed me to a different way of being,
Mm.
that there are rich and educated people who behaved very differently from my neighbors in the slums. And I observed that. I
Yeah.
think it's
How old
important
were
to
you
observe.
when the nuns found you?
I was almost 6, and and
Okay.
and they made me a visitor in the school, and I've told this story of how the smartest girl was in the first seat, first row, the dumbest girl in the last seat, last row, and I was in the last seat, last row. And I also discovered I had a competitive side to me because I looked at that girl and I was really like envious. I was envious in a very positive way, and I was humiliated also. And so all of those things, we can react many different ways to humiliation and envy. But I think in my case, I put it to good use in that I promised myself I will be sitting in that first seat, first row, and I did it in a few months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's that. So education, the power of education, reading books and Time magazine and learning about places like New York City. It was a miracle. It was really transformative. And then third, of course, faith was a critical part of the formative years. I was born and raised a Catholic,
Mm,
very, very devout. I never missed a confession or mass. I prayed to the Virgin Mary. The nuns ran my school. I had the utmost
mm.
respect for them, and also saw women who were leaders because the nuns were in charge of
That's
everything.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, you quaked in your shoes. You're afraid of them. And then I became a Mormon at the age of 10, and that gave me something different, more structured religion, because Catholicism can be loosey goosey. Mormonism gave me a bigger structure and a stricter structure within
Okay.
which to frame what I would become. So I'm also really grateful for that, and a great hopefulness in, really believing that I was a child of God. So faith, uh, yeah, so those things, I think poverty and hardship, education, and then faith were a pretty good combination that helped me in
I
my
love
formative
that.
years, and I've taken them all the way through my life
Yep.
until now.
Well, in your journey, that you've described, and I think you've kind of talked a little bit or insinuated, what internal strengths or mindsets have been the most essential? You talked about the importance of education came early, like you need that education. Any other mindsets? You were determined naturally. Some people are not as determined. Um, but what was that mindset?
I had no choice. So when people say, "Oh, you're so determined, you're so confident," guys, I had no choice.
Yeah,
The alternative was oblivion and poverty, and but also you can cultivate determination and confidence. So certainly when I started out, I don't think my determination was that strong, but every time I was down or didn't feel too great or something happened at home, you know, sometimes it is a good thing not to have a choice,
you
to
just do it.
say, I mean, in fact, I found when I came to America, I found things like eating disorders and depression strange because when
Mhm.
you're born in poverty, like you're always hungry and uh like depression, we were always laughing because we were always trying not to be depressed because our circumstances were so
Yeah,
difficult. And the mindset is supple. Mindset evolves over time. So my
true.
mindset was one of, it's got to get better
Yeah,
because it was so bad, it has to get better.
yep,
And my mindset was also that as I got smarter and smarter, I realized, okay, I could get all straight A's. I know I could go to college. So your mindset begins to improve,
yeah,
like you believe in your capability, so that someday when it came time to say, am I applying to Harvard? The answer was yes. I had
yeah,
developed that robust mindset through effort and experience.
yeah.
And there was a period in high school I was bullied in a Catholic girls' school that is intense and
Uh,
brutal. And I remember going through that period, crying every day, writing in my
uh,
journal, and like dealing with hurt. How do you
yeah.
deal with hurt when you have nobody to talk to and nobody to help you? So I think again, and internally the mindset, even the growth mindset, Carol Dweck's
Yes, I was
concept of a
thinking
growth
that.
mindset.
Yeah,
I had to learn to say, I'm not stupid. I had to learn
yep,
to say,
yep,
I'm just having a bad day, or it will get better tomorrow. And the more effort I put into it, my teachers were amazing. I had amazing teachers in elementary school and in high school, maybe three of those teachers who made them a gigantic difference because they entrusted me with so much and
yeah.
made me feel grown up. So I think
I love
also
that.
a
I love
mindset,
that.
important mindset is you're not alone,
Yeah,
whether you are crying to God or you are seeking friends or mentors. teachers, neighbors. I think it's so important that we remember we are not alone.
I that is such a good reminder. Now let's fast forward a little bit to maybe college or early career. A lot of leaders talk about defining moments. I, in my writing, talk about transformational moments. Sometimes it's just a moment. As you think back to maybe college or early career, what is one or two moments from your earlier life during those times that really guides your leadership still today?
Here's one good one. It's a good anecdote. This is mainly a women audience, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So college, right? I started at the University of the Philippines. I was only 15 and I was on a government scholarship. And then I went to BYU. And this anecdote is from BYU. So I had a
Okay.
tall blonde boyfriend. And at BYU, you're always thinking eternal marriage and blah, blah, blah. Everything we were socialized into thinking was our value as girls and women. And I remember a secretary telling me, "Hey, don't be so smart. No one's going to ask you out." And that had a big impact on me. But I was still smart. I couldn't help it. But anyway, this boyfriend, we were walking. I thought we were having a romantic walk on campus one night, and he turns to me and says, "I have to break up with you." And I was like, Why?" And he said, "Well, you want to go to law school, why don't you major in dance?"
Oh, wow.
I was
And that
probably,
still happens occasionally today.
I
I hate to
know,
say it.
I was 19 or 20. It broke my heart. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I thought something was wrong with me. Now, I mentioned that anecdote because you asked what's something formative, something. Um, it was a very good thing to have happened to me because it really made me ask,
Yeah.
who am I? If another man comes to me and says, "You can't do that," am I gonna change my life? Am I gonna
Mm,
change my ambitions? Of course, I did. I ended up not going to law school, but I did some many other fantastic things. So I say that because I began by saying that we are formed by our families, our communities, our culture, our religion, and I think it's so important in life and leadership, to listen to the lessons along the way because other people will try to define us,
mm,
and we have to be able to say, "That's not me. That does not sit well with
yeah.
me." And that's not always easy. So that's one anecdote. And I also pursued my passion, which was Russian literature, without any inkling of how that's going to get me a job. So today everybody is told to think about a job, but
They are.
I will say to you, get some skills, and Russian literature gives you skills in thinking and empathy and writing. And
Amen.
if you're great at it, all bosses will love you
Yeah.
and will want you.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of what is practical, but whatever it is you're doing, have some confidence if you love it, and that be picking up skills along the way. And then early in my career, it was really quite difficult for me because I started my career in the Soviet Union. I had a
Mm.
boss at Harvard. I was an employee of Harvard University. I was so excited to get this job that was paying me like 36,500. I thought I'd won the lottery. And this is somewhat related to the BYU anecdote. So when you work in Moscow, the Soviet Union, very, very sexist.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted me to make coffee. And I had to think about, what assets did I have? Number one, my Russian was very good.
Mm.
So I would open my mouth and Russians would pay attention because they're like, how does this foreigner speak Russian so well? And then when I got my PhD, I made everybody call me doctor. At UVU, not everyone was comfortable calling me president. But
Yeah.
in the first 3 months, I had a cabinet member tell me, "Why do I have to call you president?" And I said, "It's gendered. I'm coming to Utah, and I know there are not many women leaders here. So let's just start with president.
Yeah.
Later on, you may call me Astrid. Let's start with president." And I
I
think they were
like that.
shocked. I think
Yeah.
this gentleman was shocked. And so I made people call me doctor when I was in the Soviet Union, and because I looked so young, I really looked
Yes.
so
Yeah.
young. I was in my 20s. I looked like I was 17.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that I learned, so there's the doctor. I also used the Harvard name, so like know what assets, the Russian language. And then the third thing was very physical. I'm short, I'm tiny. I was 89 pounds at the time. And if I walk into a room with 100 people from the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the top think tanks, I would tell myself, hey, girl, you have 5 minutes to control this room.
Hmm.
Make them pay attention to you. And I remember moving back to New York, and a girlfriend said to me, hey, you have a habit of barging into a room. Barging was the word she used. It made me stop and pause. Like, I'm not aware that I'm barging, but I guess that's what I do. I use all of my
Hmm.
body to walk into a room and stand straight and not speak with a high voice. Sometimes my voice is also naturally high, but to remember to speak with some conviction, and then I over prepared. I
Hmm.
will I will say women are judged differently.
Yes. Absolutely.
And if your tone of voice says you're self-doubting, you will be doubted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just these are little tricks where I would
Yeah.
psych myself into saying, okay, 5 minutes. I prepare, I over prepare. And that's still, if you hear me give a presentation today, people say, oh, you have a photographic memory. Well, that's because I prepare. I
Yeah.
respect my audience. And if I'm fumbling on my data, who wants to listen to that? It's boring.
Yeah.
So over prepare. Yeah. So those
Those
are
are
some
good.
hacks.
Those are good tips for us. I appreciate that. Now, shifting a bit, this past year has brought profound personal loss. How have you navigated the tension between private grief and the public responsibilities that you've had to lead, especially such a huge university here in the state of Utah?
Yeah, I have said a few things publicly about this.
Yeah.
And it's been the hardest year
Yeah.
of my life. And the fact that I am sitting in front of you all today is a testament to what therapy can do, and self-help, because I thought I was going to die,
Yeah.
but I didn't. And so grief, I know I'm not the only one. I have no monopoly on it. And some of it's public, some of it's very private. People don't know what I'm going through. And I did take time off. So the first
Yeah.
thing is, what do you need? Be gentle with yourself. If you're not eating, not sleeping, save your life.
Yeah.
And I took 3 months off on bereavement leave. Obviously, I'm someone who works 12 to 18 hours a day every
Yeah.
day, usually weekends included. And I wasn't apologetic about that at all.
I'm so
Um,
glad you weren't, because I knew I had followed that, and I'm glad you weren't apologetic.
why should I be? My husband died
Yeah.
at 9 in the morning on a mountain somewhere, and who's gonna fix that for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I returned to work, it was still really difficult, but muscle memory, you learn
Yeah.
every day gets a little better. To everyone here listening to this, I want you to know that you deserve help.
Hmm.
Whatever the hell you're going through, you deserve help. You are worthy of receiving love and kindness. And also, you're worthy of saying no to people who think they know you and want to help you and are completely insensitive and unhelpful.
Yeah.
You are worthy of saying no to all of that.
Mm.
Um, I was not great when I returned to work.
Mm.
In fact, I learned that internally people were whatever, not happy, and that's their problem, not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eventually, your muscle memory returns, and for me, thinking what else needs to be done here that
Yeah.
is important that only I can do, and returning to leadership. And of course, you didn't mention it, but Charlie Kirk happened
Yes.
on September 10, my husband's birthday.
Oh,
And I was on my way to Rome. I was supposed to meet the Pope, which was so significant to me.
yeah.
in my healing, my spiritual evolution. And so this is about life and leadership. Life will whack you, will whack
Mm,
all of us, and never believe anyone who says they're always good or God is always great to them. That's a lie.
mm,
I think what led me to a good place where I could heal is simply being honest with what was my pain and my grief, and
yeah.
and all the complexity of it, which people don't know, they
Yeah.
don't understand, they don't know. And that's okay, that's okay. You have I had to learn to live with aloneness, and
I'm
and
sure. Yeah.
and and depression, it's a real thing. I didn't know that until this year. And trauma, those are all real things. But I share that because I I want everyone within the sound of my voice to know that you will, day by day, moment by moment, find something new in you, something true and beautiful and strong, and something very broken also.
Yeah.
And it's a life and leadership skill to sit with brokenness, to sit with pain, to sit with grief, to sit in the dark, to grovel crying on the floor. It's part of life and leadership. And
And it's not weakness. You have to, I haven't had that kind of loss, but people who have told me you have to do that. You have to let it in. And that's strength.
yeah, weakness is denial. Most people live in denial, and even many marriages survive because of denial and automation. And so what's really been important to me, and I don't know where I got this, is it's always been important to me to be real.
Mm.
When I started the job at UVU, somebody asked my chief of staff what she really like, as if I had one face for staff and one face for another staff. I'm like, that's too much work.
It is
I
too much work. And a lot of women we do that. We try and hide parts of our life, in certain ways in our workplaces. But it is exhausting for men. I've had hundreds of women tell me how exhausted they are doing that.
Yeah,
And you
sometimes I say
say,
things
no,
that offend people. They think it's wrong. I'm like, okay, that's who I am. I don't want to be tiptoeing, because no
yeah,
job is worth tiptoeing around, everybody. I mean, of course, you have to be respectful, the norms of
yes,
professionalism. But I think to be true to what we are and who we are, and of course we evolve as well, but I think we should be comfortable in our skin. So
yeah,
I will repeat that phrase: please be comfortable in your skin. And I know it's hard to do. It's hard to do. I grew up with this flat nose in the Philippines, and that was a big liability because you're not pretty, and my skin isn't fair enough. So I grew up with a lot of baggage. I wasn't pretty, I wasn't tall, I wasn't white. Filipinos love whiter skin and flat nose and poor. So I've had to learn over time in my life, how am I happiest? How am I most at peace with myself? Religion is another thing that makes you
yeah.
kind of have to pretend. And I also find
Mm.
that really, I find that really difficult. I found in my 20s, even with religion, and my early 30s, I had to speak my mind, or it was so bad for me otherwise.
So you're saying religion sometimes it puts you in a place where you don't speak your mind, where you feel like you have to act a certain way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, both on the sexism and dogma. It's really
Um,
difficult in any religion. Maybe Catholicism was easier because you just go to mass, you go to confession if you want to, but there's no interviews. But any kind of religion with a serious orthodoxy and a very strong culture. In my case, when as a Mormon, in my 20s, it started kind of chafing because, well, remember the story of the boyfriend. And also,
Yes, yes,
and also
exactly.
because I felt like I had to lie about my ambitions. Why did I have to lie about my ambitions if I wanted to run the world and travel the world? Why was that wrong? It felt so limiting. And so I think even our relationship with God, maybe that's the one we have to be really honest
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not keep, carrying a heavy burden.
Aspirational shame is what one of the therapists who's well known in the state of Utah, she calls it, especially in religious settings, that and especially for women, right? That we aspire, you know me a bit, and so it's that drive to do things that sometimes other women don't, and we aspire. It's more than aspire though. Sometimes we feel called to do it. I think aspirations sometimes for women sounds bad. And what would you say to that? Get over it? Just own it? Be authentic?
I think own your life. Own
Mm,
own your life.
just got one.
I am serious. I am 1,000% serious. Own your life.
I like that.
Your kids will make choices, your spouses will make choices, your in-laws will make choices. Own your life and how you go about it every single day. And it's never going to be perfect. There's nothing wrong with aspirations, but are those aspirations yours?
Oh, good.
Or were you
Good.
socialized into having those aspirations? And that you would somehow be less than if your aspirations did not fit the mold.
Mm. I sure struggled with that for a lot of years. Feeling guilt for aspirations and feeling like, you know, my kids would have been better if I would have done something. And then I just gave it all up and said, I feel the purpose. I feel and I need to do that's a higher level kind of thing than worrying about. But you brought up socialization, and that is so true. I talk about that quite a bit. We're socialized to do things, so they're habits. We see other women doing them, apologizing, all of those disclaimers, the things that we are the social norm. But we have to, I love what you say, just own your life. That's a really good way to say that.
Yeah, it's harder in your 20s,
It
even
is.
even harder in your 30s. But you hit 40, it's so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. So you brought
And
up, oh, keep going. Yeah.
anyway, it gets so much better because you have no time for crap.
I like that. It's true. It's so true. Now you brought up, um, uh, Charlie Kirk. The tragedy on your campus this year, of course, shook the entire state, but more than the state, the nation, and even beyond. So, that these are around leadership. So you have learned more this year about crisis leadership. Um, what what did you learn that you believe every leader, regardless of the sector, really
Mm.
should understand? Because there's a lot of crises, happening in different parts. What do we need to know as we're leaders, as we're developing leadership about that?
Yeah, you sometimes think that happens to other people, crisis that doesn't
Mm,
happen under me. And so the first thing I think for preparing for crisis leadership is to be humble.
mm,
Humility can go a long way because what you learn in a crisis is there will always be so many moving parts and so many aspects that uh, you may not be fully prepared for, but you have to step up to it anyway. So humility, working with your team, good
mm.
communication, the best that you can. And in the case of Charlie Kirk, because of law enforcement and the nature of what happened, uh, there are so many things that have to be handled with extreme care, great
Yes,
care. And then there's the human aspect of returning students, faculty, and staff, returning the feeling of safety.
yes.
There is the aspect of creating unity when everybody wants to be divided, or many people want division and yelling and self righteous judgment. and the ability to focus on, what unites us rather than what
Mhm.
divides us. And I've really learned that it is a group effort. As a leader, you can be symbolic, you can be operational. But when I think about how UVU has handled this in the best way that it could, I think about my cabinet, I think about collaborating with law enforcement, I think about the students who themselves I thought showed me more wisdom, compassion, and straight talk, straight hard conversation than many adults. And so it gave me
Wow.
so much hope. It gave me so much trust that, despite our troubles today, I think these younger people uh, are more thoughtful than we give them
Mm.
credit for, more thoughtful, more articulate, more insightful. Crisis leadership, you'll have to rely on a lot of help,
Yes.
and no
Don't
one.
you have to shut the noise out sometimes? I mean, because there's going to be criticism all over the place. Don't you just have to kind of put your head down in some ways, and shut out some of the noise?
Um, the answer to that is yes. It's
Okay.
harder said than done.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
when you are the leader, you're the lightning rod for
Mm.
everyone's fears, for everyone's disgust, for
Mm.
everyone's conspiracy theories. Uh,
That's
but
a hard to have on your shoulders, especially after your own personal grief. That's heavy. That's a heavy load.
well, life and leadership, we can only step up to what is being asked of us, to what the moment is asking of us. And um, just, I think, less than 2 weeks after the assassination, we had Arthur Brooks on campus
Yeah.
for the Restore conference, Faith Matters, and he posed those questions: Why did this happen at UVU? Why did this happen in Utah? What is this moment asking of you? And I was kind of riveted by those questions because I
Oh,
think
yeah.
they're the right questions to ask. Um, I didn't ask for it. Nobody asked for it, but it did happen on my campus. And so the question, what is this moment asking of us? And as a result of that crisis, we actually launched something called Our Better Selves for a Better America.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it is to me an incredibly hopeful initiative where we're going to power up the peace conferences that we already conduct on campus,
Mm.
the dialogue to dispel extremism. We are launching more certificates and academic degrees in mediation, negotiation, etc.
I'd
And then
love that.
and then we are partnering with the Haravi Peace Institute at Utah
Yes.
State and with the Governors Disagree Better Institute and with Braver Angels, which is a national
Yeah.
organization on debates
Yeah.
on college campuses. And because the idea is to give everybody the skills and tools they need to actually handle disagreement, polarization. It's our better selves. There is something called
Yes.
better selves because America can be a better America. I'm an
Yeah.
immigrant and I
Yeah.
grew up in a country where a political assassination was the norm.
Mm.
And a little civil war in the south of the Philippines. I mean martial law. So to me, as an immigrant in America, the most painful thing is to see the norms of debate and discourse fall apart in the United States, and that a big chunk of
Yeah.
Americans say violence is okay when you disagree, and that should not be the case.
No. Not at all. And that's kind of scary. There's some work to do. And by the way, I used to debate, real debate, and taught debate when I was a junior high teacher. And I talk about, so I integrated in some of my classes, and I talk about how useful that skill is to be able to take a topic and I go take it out of you, take it out of your emotion, your feeling, put it out there and kind of beat it and have a discussion and you could do different sides and see instead of having it everything so close to us. It's such a and feeling just feeling attacked or whatever. So it's an interesting skill to be able to disagree better, right? To be able
Yeah,
to do that, but to hold space, it's the dignity index too,
yeah,
to see and hear truly and treating everybody with dignity, no matter political party, no matter whatever. So
yeah. I mean, listening is a hard skill. I'm not
it
very
is.
strong at listening. Many leaders are not good listeners
Yeah.
because we have opinions and we want to get things done. You know, we want to implement and. But I think that that is a badly needed skill at the
Yeah.
moment, and also feeding ourselves uh, good information, that we don't just stay in our echo chambers because it is most comfortable to
Yeah.
stay in our echo chambers. And so I think it's the work is on all of us to be
To
better
do it. Yeah.
informed and to be able to disagree and even just listen.
Yeah.
Recently on our campus at UVU, we had Daryl Davis. And if that name is
Mm.
unfamiliar to the listeners today, I would urge them to look him up.
Yeah.
Daryl Davis. He's a Black musician who played with Chuck Berry and many
Mm.
other greats. But anyway, alongside his being a musician, he has actually worked for 40 years uh, to work with the Ku Klux Klan to get them to see Black people and
Oh.
listen to Black people. And he has worked with right wing extremists, and it's amazing. If you look at, he's been featured on NPR and CNN, and to listen to him talk about how he does
Wow.
this work and the courage that it takes to have a meal and a sit down with a person who thinks Blacks are not fully human, but then they would admire his music
Huh.
and say, oh, you learned that from Jerry Lee Lewis. And he would say, no, this is Black music. This originated from the Mississippi Delta, but it takes a lot of courage and care and skill
Skill.
to
I was
do.
going to say
Yeah.
skill because we naturally, most of us, it matters how we're socialized, withdraw, and we're doing that more and more from people different than us. There's a research study from last year on the connection opportunity that said the biggest divide in 2025 now is not race, it's not some of these other things, but it's that political divide. But consciously, so naturally, we're going to want to divide and separate. And and what you're saying about him is that you intentionally put yourself into a situation and think about what you're doing and develop skill and all of those things. And that's what's going to bring us together is to learn how to listen.
Mm,
I love that. I'm looking at our time. It's going so fast. I want to move us because I haven't had another guest on for these conversations that's in higher education. And going to college, all of that's so important in my heart, my head, heart, and hands, right? It's education is so critical. Education, the state of education in Utah, in around the country has been going in different directions. And I just wanted to give you a space to like what where are we at in terms of anything you want to share, but what gives you hope as well about the future of higher education?
Um, I never planned to be a university
Yeah.
president. That was never in my mind. And I think being an accidental president of the largest enrolled university in Utah has been a fantastic surprise and and a blessing. And where do I find hope today? A lot of it is in institutions like UVU, because when I started, enrollment was probably 39,000. Is now 48,000. Our graduating
Wow.
class was roughly 5,900 in
Wow.
2019. Our graduating class in 2025 in April was 12,900 students. We have raised $254 million in seven and a
Wow.
half years. We have built about 10 new buildings and structures.
Wow.
Um, we have done digital transformation. I'm the only president of a hired a vice president for digital transformation to really look at technology very seriously. So where do I find hope? I find hope in people who come to UVU. When I was new, I would talk randomly to students in the hallway of Flags, and I would cry when they told me their story
Mm.
because it was very clear they were bringing dreams. They did not feel they were worthy of college. They did not, not all of them, of course, there were many who were very well
Yeah.
prepared as well.
UVU has a lot of first generation students, I know.
We are 40% first generation, and
Wow.
we are nearly 20% age 25 and older. So,
Mm,
so where is my hope? It is in these people who continue to dream. It is in
mhm.
these immigrants who think, well, if I get a college degree, my children will more likely go to college. It's in the mothers who return to college after raising their children and finishing, nursing. One woman came up to me and she said, I read your story. It made me return and finish nursing, and I'm now an administrator at Intermountain. And I thought, how fantastic is that? Because they're doing the hard work. So the people themselves. I think secondly, my hope also comes from the fact that I think Utah's culture respects education. So wherever education is still respected, and that's not true of all of America
Yeah.
today. And so I hope that Utah can somehow lead the way in saying education is still necessary, because I've lived and worked in 5 different countries. And
Mm,
some of these most progressive and prosperous countries like Singapore or even China, which has gotten hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, they put a lot of money in
the
education.
education.
Asians make a ton of sacrifices so their kids could go to college. So I think in the culture there is still some respect. We need to keep strengthening that,
Yes.
and then third, I also feel hope in the fact that America is capable always of reinventing itself throughout its history. So I think when you take
Yeah.
the long view, what historians call the longue durée of history, you'll know that the end is never the end. And I certainly believe that even in the age of AI, education will continue to be a big part of that, because we are not machines, we are human. And so this is where I think of the humanities, which I've defended forcefully in Utah.
Yes.
That's my own
And we have
background.
to. We have
Yeah.
to.
And I feel that, in the greatest crises, the solutions are often not technical, the solutions are
Yeah.
often human. So, and plus, university is fun.
It is.
What other institution will have arts and sports and
Yeah.
classes and I don't know, Chick-fil-A if that's what you want, or gurus, or pizza and sushi, and you know what, it's such an amazing place to contribute and become an adult and
Yeah.
mentor others, and it facilitates all of that because that's the nature of a university.
Yeah. And I
So
loved my
I'm
time. I was
hopeful.
at Utah Valley University, as you know, for 18 years, and we crossed over for a year or two at least, and then shifted mainly just because USU has extension and is statewide, and that's the work that we're really doing. And so I loved UVU and the students and my peers and so forth. Just time for maybe a couple more questions. I've actually pulled in a few from already from that have come in from the chat, but I'm really curious as you look ahead, what personal or institutional commitments are guiding really your next chapter of leadership?
Yeah. Um, this next chapter is very clear to me that I need time,
Yeah.
that I absolutely need to be left alone, to do some writing, to do some
Mm,
thinking, to do more therapy, to do some travel. So I have a 16-year-old at home, so I'm
okay.
very aware of my duties. And I have a 29-year-old who just got engaged. So I have a wedding in June. And then my middle son, lives in Salt Lake. I think that we as people need time alone, with
Mm,
because it's like, a field that is left fallow becomes more fertile. And to me, that
yes.
that is the wake up. Uh, there is no scarcity of people who want my time
Yeah.
and want me to consider this job or that
Yeah.
board seat. And this is a unique time where I think the greatest skill I could exercise is to say no temporarily.
Yeah.
And I feel that, writing is, I've written a book, I've written essays, I've written chapters, I've written articles in peer-reviewed journals, but there's one or two books that I am really, one in fact is close to getting done.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will do that. And then, like I
And
said,
that's leadership. Writing and putting things out is part of leadership. I mean, all
yeah,
of the things you're healing is
yeah,
part of
yes,
leadership.
I'm learning to fly fish. I have not yet
Oh,
caught a
are
fish,
you
but
serious?
I talk about it all the time. I've been in the water for hours and discovering that that can do a lot for me also. Oh, somebody says they knew me at the French house. Ha, bonjour. So
Oh,
yes, so I feel like, look, life is fast and life is slow. Both things are true.
it is interesting, isn't it? How
Yeah.
time is tricky.
Yeah, life is busy and hard work, and life is also laziness and being a sloth.
Hmm.
If we do not understand these opposites and don't know how to give them space and time in our lives, we will have a hard time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a question: what is the one thing men can do to
I love
empower?
that question. Yeah, I was going to ask you. Here's the question. What is one thing men can do to empower their wives and daughters? And I would say coworker, but wives and
Yeah.
daughters. Let's stick there.
One thing that men can do to empower their wives and daughters is to not be intimidated by a strong wife and strong daughters. And I think the masculine aspect is so important. I think men have to be very masculine and also be very soft and emotional. I know it's a lot to ask of men, just like I ask women to be super strong and know how to make a living and know how to cry and weep on the floor. You are a better leader that way because people know you're human. And so I think for men, and men have a crisis today. Men feel purposeless, high rate of suicide among men over 50. Pornography is destroying men's brains and their ability to connect and be masculine and handsome and beautiful as a partner. I don't know, we have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And so I would say to men, support yourself, know yourself, give
Yeah.
yourself grace, be strong and be masculine and be soft and be
Yeah.
listening and
And
I
teach your
I'm I,
sons. Teach
yeah
your sons to do that too.
I'm reading this year a lot of books on male psychology, and one of the
Oh,
saddest things is really the epidemic of depression in men,
yeah.
because men internalize shame. Women will vent to their
Yeah.
girlfriends
Yeah.
or go get a massage or a pedicure shop. Men internalize it all until it completely poisons them. And so that's something for me too, is to learn that. And by the way, I've always worked and I never understood how I had girlfriends who would complain all the time and they were shopping all the time, and I would say to them, do you know what pressure is like in a bank, for example,
Hmm.
and how men are judged mercilessly, that
Hmm.
they're not men enough if they can, make this much money. So I think it's, my advice is maybe not just to men, but men and women, that we need to let each other be and just communicate better, because everybody is wounded. Everyone is carrying wounds, and women don't have a monopoly and men don't have a monopoly.
Yeah. And work together on that. Do you by chance know, I know we've got to conclude, but do you know do you remember the names of the books that you've been reading that you would recommend? And then we can put this in our email that we send to the group after.
This is so funny. Is President Tuminez being included in choosing her successor? No, no. Presidents
No,
are
no,
usually
they
not
don't.
included, in the sense that you're not part of that search committee, or because
Yeah,
that would be kind of inappropriate.
yeah,
Um, so I just wanted to answer that. Where did your interest in Russian and Soviet studies come from? Because when I was a teenager, I was worried about the thousands of nuclear weapons that I learned in a book.
Oh,
Carl
okay.
Sagan could destroy the earth 6 times over. And I was a teenager, but I couldn't accept that. And so I
Oh,
said,
I
I
love
want
it.
to learn about my
Yeah.
enemies. If communists are my enemies, who are they? What do they read?
Yeah.
What do they listen to?
Yeah.
What's their music? You know? So
So let's it's time for me to conclude, but any final thoughts for those listening today
I'll
on
send you some titles of books that have
okay,
really been helpful to me.
that sounds good.
Yeah, like I seriously, this year books have saved my life too.
I love
So
that.
my final thoughts is, look, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I want all of you to know whatever you're going through is valid, whether you're successful right now or not so successful, or doubting or not doubting at all anything in your life. Everything is valid. And I think the blessing of life is we learn and grow, and be most careful when you think you know it all.
Yeah.
Be most careful when you are full of your delusions that you've got it made. Perfect husband, perfect kids, perfect job,
Mm,
perfect whatever. You're going to come undone. And even though I know that in principle, I still feel it's a lesson
you've
I keep learning throughout my life. Stay humble, stay curious, and be open to learning and changing. That is such a privilege in life.
throughout your
Yeah.
life, all the way, all
Yeah.
the way. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, President Tuminez. I appreciate your time and and your vulnerability and in giving us and sharing with us some of your challenges and how you've coped with those and actually continued to lead through crisis and through grief. Thank you, and
Thank
we
you.
all wish you the best moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone. Thank you.